Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. Myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. It's Ukraine War live update. Why am I doing a live after I've pumped out so much content today? Because I did a video for the military aid and I had the screen recording, I had the system recording the wrong screen. So I had to redo that whole video. And I thought rather than redo that whole video, I can combine it with the geopolitics stuff. And actually it's actually easier if I do it live. Rather than pre-recording and whatnot. So sometimes it's just better to do it live. That's why I'm here. Just getting all the content out to you. I've asked if JR can come and sort of vet some of the comments and send some of the most pertinent ones through to me. However, he's obviously, 2 minutes before live to get a like, mate, do you want to come and do that? I think he's probably doing something else at the moment. So he may pop along. I don't know. Anyway, thank you for being here. We are going to look at the military aid stuff. And I've added a couple of bits because more has happened since I recorded that previous one, looking at the wrong screen. Terribly sorry, but that's the way it is. Some of you frantically said, mate, sort it out. So here is the sorting out of it. We will go to, let's move my ugly mug over to there. We're going to bring in the sources. We're going to start with China. China has curbed the sale of drone parts to the US and Europe, hindering, and I presume that means Ukraine, hindering Ukraine's war effort, according to Bloomberg. Chinese manufacturers began limiting their sales of vital drone components to their US and European customers, preluding a broader ban on exports by officials, according to Bloomberg, citing sources. Now, this is a problem. This will not only hurt Ukraine in their manufacturing of drones, but it will hurt the other nations providing drones to Ukraine. But it will also favor Russia. This is China taking sides much more overtly. Now, I wonder if this is in response to Trumpian threats of tariffs. I don't know. If China is pushed to helping Ukraine more because of a trade war with the US, that will see. I haven't really thought about this before, but the threat of a trade war with the US could push China well into the very warm embrace of the Kremlin. And that will really be an issue for Ukraine. That is one of the biggest risks we have going forward with whatever Trump does. And he's much more likely to start a trade war with China than he is to support Ukraine. And to be honest, I don't think Trump would be too concerned about Ukraine not winning it in the war against Russia and China. So I don't know. That could be a bit of a worry. Now, the US Department of the Treasury is announcing the disbursement of the $20 billion for the benefit of Ukraine as part of the $50 billion G7 loan initiative. That's the stuff that's getting the loans that are getting underwritten by the frozen Russian assets. The profits from those will be used to pay back the loan. So Ukraine doesn't have to pay back the loan. The profits to the Russian assets paid out the loan. These funds will be paid for by the windfall proceeds earned by those immobilized assets. Okay, now Matthew Miller, or Nosferatu as he is known, has said if the age of mobilization in Ukraine is lowered to 18, so there's been this big argument going on that Ukraine should lower the age of mobilization. The US is really pressuring Ukraine to do this. Recruits will be fully equipped, he says. This position of Washington has been conveyed to Kyiv. Ultimately, he says the decision on the composition of the armed forces must be made by the Ukrainians. What we have made clear to them is that if they provide additional forces to participate in the fighting, we and our allies will be ready to equip and train those forces, which is all good and well. But some have rightfully said that actually there appear to be a whole bunch of brigades that are not yet equipped. And what about them? So is this an empty promise? Don't know. But there is obviously pressure on Ukraine to mobilize those. Now, a couple of things to say to that. First of all, Zelensky, according to no reports, said, quote, we must not compensate for a lack of weapons with the youth of our soldiers. That is talking to the mobilization of 18-year-olds. He emphasized focusing on providing brigades with equipment and training rather than drafting younger recruits. Which we've talked about this before. There are arguments for and against the mobilization of that age group. However, according to BBC Ukraine, I think, or BBC News, the Ukraine arm, current mobilization rates don't even cover losses, according to sources in Ukraine's general staff, telling the BBC that. Now, my goodness, that is bad news. This is, I mean, surely we know this. Their recruitment at this stage of the war, 3 years into the war almost, with all those who were keen to fight, having already gone to the front line, having already joined up, many people leaving the country and, leaving that demographic hole in those age groups. They are unable to recruit at the rate they're losing, rather like Russia. So again, it's this game of military chicken. Who wins the war? Well, whoever is able to keep prosecuting either the offensive or defensive war the longest. Now, the report warns it's not just the older generation who must fight, but questions how long Ukraine can sustain the war with their existing resources. This is a really big challenge for Ukraine, for sure. Zelensky's team has revealed plans for a new contact group, so the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, which is Ramstein, basically. So a new version of this, possibly with the US pulling back, because with Trump coming in, that was run by essentially Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense for the US, was running that. There were calls from NATO to run it in case Trump won the election. The US said no. Maybe they were more confident that Kamala Harris was going to win, but that didn't happen. And now it might be that it looks a little bit different. And this is what Zelensky is potentially doing here. So it's meeting in December to coordinate, strengthen positions, and ensure resilience both on the battlefield and in negotiations. Quote from Serhiy Nikiforov: "We're preparing to stay strong under any scenario." Yes, indeed, as Gen Consensus says, Zelensky says that Russia has 800,000 troops in Ukraine, plus at least 50,000 in Kursk. It's a huge increase from last year. That might well be. I guess it's fairly difficult to know those numbers, isn't it? I doubt even the Russians know, to be fair. But yeah, huge numbers of people, and yet the Ukrainians are able to keep the Russians at bay. It's an absolute Herculean task that they have been able to accomplish. Now, the United States is preparing a brigade. So having said that they're willing to tool up any new units, they are apparently, according to Zelensky, preparing a brigade of Ukrainian armed forces in Germany, with negotiations taking place on the preparation of another new brigade, with France preparing them, which is what they did with the Anne of Kiev unit that is just on the Donbass now, apparently. So that's good news at France, because France said they were more than willing to train up another unit, but there just wasn't another one. So apparently that is looking like that's happening. Ukraine evidently have, if they don't have the troops, then they have an idea of what unit they are going to put together. Now, Tauruses. Are Tauruses finally coming to Ukraine? Signals are there should Scholz's rival, Friedrich Merz from the CDU, win in the upcoming snap elections in February. However, he has confirmed support for the transfer of Taurus missiles to Ukraine. He stressed that in the coming weeks and months, there should be no separate peace initiatives from Europe, and that there should be a single pan-European vision on the issue. So Germany, or Merz wants to bring everyone together to have a more unified approach to supporting Ukraine, which sounds absolutely kosher to me. But he's also said that Germany would not supply Taurus missiles to Ukraine unilaterally, only in coordination with the next US administration. That could be a problem, and European allies. Speaking after his meeting with Zelensky, Merz noted training on the system takes 4 months, and by then Trump could be he will be in office. Quote, "We must answer these questions together with the US and Europe, not alone," he said. However, Merz doubts that the single weapon system could fundamentally change the war, and that's absolutely true there. Now, here we have the French. What do we actually know before that? I've got. Oh no, I've got it in the geopolitical section. A whole thing by German Aid to Ukraine talking about Merz's meeting with Zelensky. So that'll come later. Now, French Aid to Ukraine says, including those supplied to the Anne of Kiev Brigade, that one I was just talking about, 85 Caesar guns have so far been delivered to Ukraine, which is more than the French army's pre-war stock of 77. And the symbolic threshold of 100 is, soon to be exceeded. That does, I think, include the Danish ones. He says are obviously counted. I presume the Danes have financed I think 2 lots. They said that they're expediting another lot. So I don't know whether it's that second lot or the first lot or all lots that is being discussed there. So yeah. Moving on, French aid to Ukraine again says the main advantage remains the manoeuvrability and impressive speed of the machine. What's he talking about? This is the AMX-10 RC. This is this light tank or heavily gunned APC, whatever you want to call it. Well, it's not really an APC because it's not. It just has the crew, so it's more of a. I don't know. I call it a light tank, whatever. The main advantage remains the maneuverability and impressive speed in the machine, says a user here, which in skilled hands allows you to turn the AMX-10 RC into a real terror for the enemy. He says that, but I would like to know how often these are being used on the front line, because we have seen, or supposedly in 2023, in May 2023 time, when the Russians were receiving the Ukrainian counteroffensive, I heard that they had pulled these back because the armor was too light and they were getting a bit hammered. So I don't know how much these are being used on the front line. It'll be interesting to know that. Right. Here we go. 10 to 12. Right. This is Zelensky saying today 10 to 12 Patriots, additional Patriots, can save lives and make Putin's war meaningless. Funding could come from frozen Russian assets, Zelensky said. So that's, I assume, the 300 billion rather than the loans that are being given out, the actual assets themselves. Ukraine's president emphasized that air defense is key to protecting civilians and discussed it with President Biden, NATO Secretary General Rutte, and Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk. It would be really interesting if they could get. I mean, what would Ukraine do if they were able to get $300 billion? A, how quickly could that be dispersed? And B, what would be first on the shopping list? And I guess it depends how quickly they could get things like Patriots as well. Like, do they have to order them? Can they get them from a nation? Is a nation willing to give up more Patriots? And there be a gap between ordering a new one and getting that delivered and giving them an old one? So all of those questions. But I wonder what would be I'd love to see a Zelensky shopping list for if he was able to spend 300 billion. Right. Germany and the US are to join forces to develop a unified drone control program for the Ukrainian armed forces. So a new unified software program promises to simplify complex unmanned aerial system management as Ukraine deploys over 200 different drone models. So you've got to remember that they're using unmanned aerial drones, unmanned ground drones, and unmanned surface drones. So air, land, and sea. And they, in each category, they have got many drones, sometimes hundreds of drones, maybe with the aerial category. All of them being controlled differently. How confusing is that? What you'd like is to have a control system and to plug and play different drones, so you don't have to just keep changing controllers and this and that. So I presume this is what they're working on, which sounds to me like an eminently sensible idea. Thank you very much for those in the live chat who are being awesome. Now, here we have a new UGV, unmanned ground vehicle. The Ministry of Defense has codified and approved for operation the Ukrainian robotic combat complex on a tracked platform equipped with a Browning 12.7mm machine gun, the Droid TW 12.7. So this is a pretty impressive looking piece of kit. I do wonder how you would use these, like on a very small tactical level. If you're approaching a trench or a building, would you send this in first and have your troops behind? How quickly can these drive? Would it just end up being fairly sacrificial, but an expensive sacrifice? But then you'd rather sacrifice that than humans. And how useful would it be for taking out, for suppressive fire, for et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, that's a pretty impressive piece of kit, and they seem to have a lot more UGVs coming down the pipeline there. Okay, moving on. The Palencia missile drone has entered serial production. The Peklo, the Hell missile drone, has successfully passed its first combat deployments. Successful tests of the new Rutte missile are underway. I've not heard the Rutte. A long-range Neptune will soon be a terrible reality for the occupiers, says Zelensky. We keep hearing about the Neptune R360. I don't know whether that is they keep saying that they are scaling it up and this and that. Some people have said that a Neptune facility might well have been hit in this war, and that's why it was delayed, because they were talking about it very much early on in the war, talking about scaling it up, and then it didn't quite happen. But you know, it's supposed to be happening now. I'm waiting, and I'm waiting at the moment. I think any day now, surely there's going to be just a massive drone and missile wave at Russia, because we've seen literal pictures of Zelensky showing, was it Schultz around the other day or whoever, showing all of these new drones, and you're thinking, great, let's get those, you know, attacking Russia, and then we haven't seen it yet. So someday soon, I'm sure it will happen. Okay, Moldova will receive equipment from the EU for intercepting drones, according to the EU ambassador to Chisinau, Yanis Mazalks. According to him, the equipment will be delivered to Moldova no earlier than 2025. I presume that is stuff to shoot down Russian drones that are coming into Moldova, essentially aiming for Ukraine, rather than proactively for a conflict that is somewhere down the line. So good news there that the EU is helping out Moldova. I think it's so important that Moldova, Georgia need to be helped as much as possible. Armenia, some of these places that are really within the sphere of influence of Russia need to be supported massively. And here, and I have talked to you about this before, but the UK is set to introduce domestic manufacturing of artillery gun barrels for the first time in a decade, with Sheffield Forgemasters providing British steel for production. Excellent stuff. And indeed, there was, I think Shashant Joshi had something to say to that, or is Edward Hunter Christie saying, you know, this is really good, but some might say, you know, why wasn't this the case 2 years ago? But really good that our manufacturing in the UK is able to support Ukraine, but also our own steel industry, and you know, it's also useful for us in terms of our own security going forwards. Right, now moving on to Russia. I am feeling a little bit better, still somewhat under the weather, but man, I was minging yesterday and the day before. Whoosh. Today, a lot better. Okay, Russia. I talked to you, I showed you this before, but just to remind you that the guided glide bomb usage has really gone down, which is excellent news, over November. A little bit of an uptick back up there. I don't know. Hopefully they aren't going to start using more and more. It's thought because of the use of ATACMS into Russia that they've moved those planes further back. And that has meant that longer trips means you can do fewer sorties. Fewer sorties means fewer bombs. Fewer bombs means a graph like that. So that's really good, because it was going up fairly steadily, and then a big dip in November. Good news, which is exactly, so that was a point where they received the permission to shoot those ATACMS, and it's from there on that you see it go down. Right, Russia, goodness me, we have heard that Russia are giving Pyongyang, North Korea, for their troops and equipment. They're giving them, what is it, nuclear secrets, missile tech. Here we're hearing MiG-29s and Su-27 fighter aircraft going to Pyongyang. You know, all sorts of stuff. Some bales of hay, some 5 bowls of gruel, 6 half-shorn badgers, are all going over to Pyongyang and of course hydrocarbons, energy. That's a big one. Energy and food, I believe, have been hinted as well as going to Pyongyang. Now, this is the commander of the US Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Samuel Paparo, who we'll hear from again in a minute. That these planes are going to Pyongyang to effectively pay for those soldiers that are going the other way. Now, information about Russia's ability to produce 25 Ureshnik per month is not true. The head of disinformation, Kovalenko, anti-disinformation, he is talking about these intermediate range ballistic missiles with the MIRVs, the multiple re-entry vehicles, those submunitions. The one that was sent from Astrakhan previously to hit Dnipro, They apparently, according to the Russians, can make 25 a month. But as a result of sanctions, the production cycle of high-tech missiles in Russia has significantly slowed down. The purpose of the information is to spread fear in Western society, says Konfilenko, so that they can't make it at that rate. It's just saber rattling. That's his position. I'd probably agree. This huge Voronezh radar, one that was hit recently back in May, the Russians are selling one to India, which is a bit of a shame because it means they're still doing business, still a great deal of arms export, essentially. That's how I'd categorize that. Now, the Indians are going to make 60% of that in India, a bit like the South Korean model of arms export there. Yeah, fairly decent pot of money. $4 billion is the equivalent cost of the contract. So yeah, India is still helping out Russia there, which is a real shame. And then we have, what do we have here? This is going back to that Admiral Samuel Paparo, the US Navy's top commander in the Indo-Pacific, said that Russia will likely give submarine technology to China that would undercut the US undersea dominance. This is, again, a real issue of China and Russia getting closer and closer, especially if there's this trade war that might take place. A real challenge, actually, for global security is if Russia does give submarine tech to China, because actually one area where the Russians genuinely are pretty good is in the submarine domain. So they are, I've spoken to a number of people who talk about their submarines go around the world and it's kind of cat and mouse, but they do a really good job of being undetected. And the Americans and the Brits and NATO, are very well aware of Russia's prominence in the submarine domain. So to give tech to China is actually, I think, really, really worrying. But it also shows, I guess, how desperate Russia are, because that is one area where they have some dominance, right? And therefore, they could use that for great leverage. That's where they're at now. They are basically giving China everything they can, essentially, I would have thought, in terms of tech. Like how China are going to be basically the new, they'll overtake Russia in every conceivable way somewhat soon, I would have thought. And so, yeah, it is a real concern that for those hawks in America who are more afraid of China than Russia, pay attention here. And this is why Russia needs to be dealt with very, very seriously. Okay, now, yeah, this is true. Gen Consensus says, I wonder how advanced Russian submarines really are. This is hardly state of the art. You say that, but I was listening to an interview on Ukraine Latest podcast of a submarine, a former submarine captain, I think, Royal Navy, just saying that yeah, the Russians do run circles around them, type thing. Yeah, we shall see. Anyway, moving on to geopolitical subject matter. But before we do that, let's pop in and say hello to everyone. Hello, everyone. Let's look at some of your comments, but I haven't been able to start ones that are worthy of note, so sorry about that. I'm just going to do some thank yous. Joe Hales, good to have you on board again, Joe. Thanks as always. USA is going to be an interesting and frightening new dynamic, as I expect fallout there in the coming years. I've just done I did it earlier, a reaction video to Trump's interview on Meet the Press, and it's an hour long, and I only got halfway through the interview, so I'll probably do a 2-part series, and you don't have to watch everything I do, obviously. But literally everything that man said was either an outright lie or incorrect or massive distortion, or he was ignorant. It was really worrying that he's going to be in charge, because I know Trump lovers love him, and I've got Trump derangement syndrome because I dare to criticize him. But the reality of the matter is, he has some pretty distorted views of the world, and he outright he was making outright lies. And then when she said, so it's really interesting, he said something like 13,099 murderers, illegal immigrant murderers have been out and about in the last 3 years. So in Trump's in Biden's last tenure. And Kristen Welker was interviewing and said, actually, that's not true. That I'm sure that's only in the last 3 years of the not the last 3 years. That's the last 40 years, according to data. And he went, no, it's not. It's the last 3 years, and you're just living in this fiction. And she corrected him, and he went, no, you're wrong. And he just like steamrolls through just like mere assertion, and you go and look at the data and he's wrong. He's 100% wrong and she's 100% right. It's 40 years of data that he's blaming all on Biden. And I'm thinking, God, if the president of the US can just lie, and then even when he gets called out says, no, you're wrong, and then just continue that lie and then say yours is just some weird fiction, you're just thinking, what hope does truth have over the next 4 years? Is going to be frightening, I think, because, you know, as they say, one of the first casualties of war is truth. We are in a political war. I think it is so divisive in America, but we're in a post-truth age. We talked about this 2016 onwards. I used to write articles about, you know, epistemic crisis, you know, the crisis of knowledge and truth, and we don't know what's right and wrong and what's true and not true. And that's being fueled by China, by North Korea, by Iran, and obviously by Russia. They are fueling the divisive nature of our politics, and they are getting us to question what is right and wrong. It's hard enough without our own politicians just lying to us. It's deeply, honestly, the truth is getting so devalued now, and disinformation so normalized, lying so normalized, that we're in a deeply worrying point of time. Now, thank you so much to Ida. It's amazingly generous for your Norwegian love, for those kronas. Great to see so much commitment and doing a very good and important job. Thank you very much. It is an obsession, and yeah, I did this video today on, you know, how has a war affected you? How's it changed you? And I can't wait to do a video looking at that. Because so many people have put some amazing comments about how the war has affected them in all these different ways. Absolutely fascinating. But it's I think it's a really important job to do in disseminating what is going on. Now, I bring my own bias to this. Of course I do. You know that I'm not a fan of Trump, but I think I'm justified in that. I've had 8 years of writing articles on Trump, and it, you know, I'm not just pulling it out my posterior because I just don't like that politics. You know, when truth is so important to me, then someone that abuses truth so much, it becomes a real problem. But yeah, anyway, the point I was trying to make is that I have all these biases, and I know I do, and I wear my heart on my sleeve. So it's very difficult for me to comment on global geopolitics without bringing my my personal positions to the fore. But as long as you understand that, and I know those of you some of you, the few Republicans who are still with me, you know what I'm like, and I just hope you can grin and bear it. Paul Gilbert, for your wine fund, thank you, my friend. Really appreciate that, and thank you for your comment as well on that video I was just talking about. But I didn't know, really very generous. Thank you. Now, Javier Alvarez, how probable is Ukraine to launch a counterattack this winter? Ukraine seem to be better prepared and equipped now than in spring. So they are better prepared, I think, and they are better equipped. They just don't have enough people. And I was wondering whether the Anne of Kiev unit was going to be used as an offensive unit to do a counteroffensive. They were talking the other week about needing to do a counteroffensive because they absolutely have to wrest back initiative. You can't just sit back and defend the whole time. You will never win a game of football if all 11 of your players are in your own penalty area, right? You need to be able to score goals. So you need to, in order to prevail in a war or take the initiative away from the Russians, you need to attack. Otherwise, you're always dancing to their tune. So they need to attack, and I would suggest attacking north of the border, maybe thrusting through Vovchansk or over in the Sumy area or wherever, but I think north of the border again. However, they are losing a lot of, quite a bit of ground. It depends what scale you're talking about. In the Pokrovsk area, in the southern Donetsk area, and I can imagine they might just throw in those fresh units down there as well, in which case they'll be unfortunately giving up on doing a counterattack. But I think now's the time to do a counterattack before the before the inauguration on 20th of January. So I don't know. It just depends how many units they have. And there are all these rumors about them having reserve units that haven't been brought to bear. Then there's this idea that 2.5 units are being equipped out of 10, but have they recruited all those 10 units? Does that mean that only 2.5 units were recruited and then equipped, or are there 10 units recruited, trained up, but only 2.5 of them are equipped, and the rest of them are sitting in a Butlins in Minehead or something, you know, on holiday? I don't know. So it's going to be interesting to see how that was a real British reference I made there, by the way. Most of you'd be like, what's he talking about Butlins for? What does that mean? It's like a holiday hotel thing. Anyway, good question. Johnny Nedregard, this is a great question, and I want this answered. Any news on the Swedish AWACS? The 2 radar planes that apparently the US have not allowed, or for some reason thought to be connected to the US, they have not been, you know, I don't even know that training started on them, and so on and so forth. So I would really like to know the answer to that. I'm hoping that that's just psyops and they are actually training on them and they are actually using them, or I don't know, who knows. Michael Vuchar, thank you for your Canadian Ukrainian love there, gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Really appreciate it, my good man. Right, okay. So good morning, Matt. If you're around, you can pop on. It's 3 a.m. there. I didn't ask you because it's 3 a.m. there, but you know, I guess it's a bit late for you. Anyway, let's move on. We'll get to, and by the way, Michael Lanning, thank you. It was yeah, it's a shame. The old Nimrod, I remember the Nimrod, as it could see submarines under the oceans. You were one that alerted me to the fact that my video was all wrong. So sorry about that. Right, let's go to look at the rest of the news. So we're going to look at geopolitical news now, and we're going to start with what some people have see as quite controversial. And by the way, Wayne the Sane here. Hopefully you've seen the video that I did earlier today, because it was based entirely on your comments. So Wayne, if you haven't yet seen the video on how has the war affected you or changed you, that is to do with your comments. So I advise you definitely go and watch that. And James from whyukraine.com, Why Ukraine, the YouTube channel, who has now joined a drone team in Ukraine. Javier, consider that we don't know or if or when we will get any other aid here. So rather than blow it all on one big chance, it might be better to plan to stretch out the stuff that we're getting. Quite possibly, but although he's saying I don't necessarily agree with that policy. Yeah, Wayne, you might like it, mate, because it's all about you. So, okay. Politico names Andriy Yermak, Putin, and Orban among Europe's most influential people in 2025. And of course, influential doesn't necessarily, you know, Hitler was influential, right? It doesn't mean they're necessarily good. Now, Andriy Yermak is seen as quite controversial because why him and not Zelensky? Some people are saying, have long said that he's more influential than, or he pulls the strings in the presidential office, and there are supposedly a number of Ukrainians who don't like Andriy Yermak because of how he pulls the strings, and he pulls the strings in ways that they don't like. So you'll quite often hear, I think, Andrew Perpetua being quite critical of Andriy Yermak and others. So Ukraine's presidential office head secures 2nd place in Politico's Dreamers category. I'd need to go and look at exactly what all that means to give you more details. So, Noel reports Russia will not invade NATO as it faces too many challenges due to the war in Ukraine, says Latvia's Foreign Ministry Baiba Braza. I actually agree with this fully. For a long time, people have been saying, well, Russia will just continue after Ukraine and go into Poland or the Baltics. And there's no way that they would attack a NATO force. And B, Poland's conventional ground forces alone could defeat Russia right now with, I think, consummate ease. Russia's ground forces are so exhausted. Now, the comeback to that is that if Russia were to take all of Ukraine, I don't think they can do that, right? They can't do that. But if they were, the idea is, as you take a country, you then start using those people as your troops. This is what happened. This is what has happened in previous wars. So the Ukrainians would end up being fodder for the Russian army. So you can argue that they would be completely exhausted by the time they got all through Ukraine, but they would just be using the Ukrainian population to do their military bidding. But he says, or she. I presume it's a she, actually. That's by because that's Dmitry Kuleba. You ask if I fear Russia will invade NATO. No, I don't think so, as it would create for far more complications than what already exists in Ukraine. I think Russia would be insane to do so. And I do wonder about reports that come out saying, well, Russia are going to be ready to attack within 3 to 6 years. I think, is that scare tactics to make sure? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, to make sure you're prepared just in case. It's absolutely fine to be over-prepared rather than under-prepared. Okay, the EU envoys will discuss on Wednesday the first potential sanctions targeting Russian hybrid threats, such as undermining elections, cyber attacks, and economic sabotage, according to Reuters. A list of 16 individuals and 3 entities could be added to a new sanctions framework. That's absolutely fantastic and what is definitely needed. So good news there. And I think, Britain on Monday announced a new wave of sanctions targeting what it said was illicit gold trade. I think Britain have been really good right throughout the course of the war in terms of sanctions. We've been doing a pretty good job of being ahead of the curve, I think, with the sanctions, probably because of the maritime connection there. But anyway, Britain on Monday announced a new wave of sanctions targeting what it said was the illicit gold trade financing Putin's war efforts in Ukraine and fueling corruption, according to Reuters. The government froze the assets of 4 individuals it said were involved in smuggling gold, and one other it said had brought more than $300 million worth of Russian gold and, by doing so, provided revenue to the Russian government. It'd be nice if they could confiscate all of that gold, right? Just checking if there's any comments in the chat there. No, okay, well, there are obviously comments, but that I need to respond to. Now, French aid to Ukraine says, quote, France strongly supports Ukraine. This is coming from the ambassador to France, of France to Ukraine, Gaël Vessière. France strongly supports Ukraine and believes that there should be no red lines, including on the issue of long-range capabilities or NATO membership. Thank you, France, and your man Gaël. There should be no red lines, and the red lines are falsely produced by the West, by ourselves. We shouldn't let Ukraine shoot those missiles too far into Russia because otherwise nuclear weapons. And Russia goes, we weren't going to do that, but now you say that, yeah, we're going to do that. So we are just offering these red lines, and then we walk up to the red line that we've painted ourselves and go, well, we can't cross that red line. Why? Oh, because, we painted it there, and they might do something that we just had a perception that they would do. Yeah, but they didn't paint it, and they haven't said they would do that. And actually, they're not really going to send nuclear missiles into Ukraine because it'd be the end of the world just because, Ukraine invaded Kursk. It didn't happen. All of these times we had all these red lines that we painted, nothing happened. So ATACM's just going an extra 100 kilometers. That's not really, they're not going to destroy the world over that, are they? Yeah, no, probably not. Good point. So on and so forth. Yes. As immortal as the Phoenix, Sébastien Lecornu, staying on France here, Minister of the Armed Forces, so the Defense Minister in France, has a good chance of being reappointed. So remember, there's been a dissolved French government, the National Assembly. You had the European elections that went wrong for the French, for the mainstream parties, and you had the rise of the Rassemblement National and Jordan Bardella and Marine Le Pen. Macron called a snap French election within a month, and that was pretty challenging. And there was a resurgence of the Rassemblement National again, although they were held back. But then it was a third left, third centre, third right, and there was a vote no confidence from the left and the right of the centrist centre-right government, and they fell. But it looks like for the third time, because this is the last government, the Michel Barnier government was like an emergency government post the elections. So you had the existing Macron previous government, then the Michel Barnier government, and then a new one. It looks like Lecornu could get it again. So he's a phoenix that rises from the flames. That would be really good because I think he's done a good job with Ukraine. It's such a complex matter at the moment that you would want to keep him in place. So according to Le Parisien, Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot who called Putin a dictator, could also be reappointed. And that'd be good because you want people who are strong against Putin being in those positions. Right. Okay. Right. There we go. Sorry, reading some comments going on there. German opposition leader vows Ukraine won't fight one-handed. So remember, I just talked earlier about Friedrich Merz, who came to Kiev. During his meeting with Zelensky, the leading contender to become Germany's next chancellor condemned the German government's hesitance to provide long-range weaponry like the Taurus cruise missiles. Well, German aid to Ukraine gives us the lowdown of what actually happened in these meetings, as far as he has interpreted it. So since he could replace Scholz, says Gal, as I like to call him, after the upcoming elections, and therefore many people are interested in his views regarding Ukraine, I'd like to summarize some important takeaways from the interview. So during the interview, he emphasized the importance of a European Ukraine contact group several times, and this is something that we heard earlier that Zelensky is going to remold. In earlier statements, he said he sees a need for a European group consisting of France, Germany, Great Britain, and Poland. Interesting side note, Zelensky supports this idea and today proposed also involving Denmark in the contact group. So, yeah, really good. Good there. When asked about a possible end to the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, Merz replies that in his view, the war has gone on for far too long. However, he believes that Putin will only end this war when he has either occupied all of Ukraine or when he realizes the pointlessness of further military action. Merz said that neither we nor Putin have arrived at either point. In his view, what needs to happen now is for Germany to reach an agreement with Ukraine, with European countries and the US to enable the Ukrainian army to fight military targets just across the border from which civilian targets in Ukraine are attacked. It's fascinating that he speaks about very specific things here. At least that's how it seems to me. He's not only talks about military targets just across the border, but also limits, at least from his statement, the approval to targets which actively attack civilian targets in Ukraine. Merz is also noticeably reserved when it comes to the delivery of Taurus cruise missiles, a topic he's always been very vocal about. This is what we were saying earlier. The question, delivery, yes or no, would have to be coordinated with both the Europeans and the US. However, he also emphasizes that his position on this has not changed and that he would at least make the offer to begin training Ukrainian soldiers on this weapon system, which is known to take about 4 months. Interestingly, however, he mentions that he was not asked about training on the Taurus cruise missile. He says that this is not the most important topic for the Ukrainian government at the moment. He agrees with Scholz as one subject, and that is that Germany must not become a party to the war. However, he disagrees with Scholz about lifting the red lines that currently apply or would or could lead to this. Merz on the topic of Ukraine and NATO, quote, the path to NATO is irreversible. However, like Scholz, he also points out that Ukraine cannot possibly become a member during the war. So Scholz had previously put, a kibosh on Ukraine joining NATO. And there is some change here from Merz saying, yeah, they will join NATO, just not while they're at war. Which is a fairly standard response, but some have been, I mean, there are different ideas going on here. So some saying that there could be like a West Germany, East Germany type affair where if you froze the lines, then Ukraine could join NATO and then they could work on diplomatically getting those territories back. That could be what Merz is up for. It's interesting about the Taurus cruise missile, and it could be that there are things to do with the missile that connect it to the US in ways that we still don't fully understand. I don't know. Right. Let's see. Are you guys all right? Good. Okay. Hungary will veto a proposal to impose EU sanctions against the Interior Minister and other Georgian officials, Foreign Minister Shihato said. This is so bloody typical, and it's frustrating. Orban and Shihato can take a long walk off a short pier, as far as I'm concerned. Like, Hungary needs to do one in its present political manifestation. As if, it wasn't already massively, patently obvious that Hungary are supporting Russia. Now they are against sanctioning Georgia because they want to support Georgia's growing autocracy in the region. It's so depressing. And by the way, we'll come on to this later in the US section, actually. One of the largest Romanian companies, one dealing with the supply and distribution of electricity, Electrica SA, is now under a massive cyber attack, which I'm sure has nothing to do with Russia, says Derek Tainus, aimed at disabling the company's critical systems. Yep. Doesn't surprise me, especially since Georgescu has been roundly spanked on the backside and told to run along. I think Russia are going to be taking some revenge on Romania. That is what they like to do. A cabinet of ministers has approved the agreement with Romania on the construction of a bridge across the Tisza River. The representative of the government of Verkhovna Rada, Taras Melnichuk, reports. Now, the bridge is being built on the Ukrainian-Romanian state border between Bila Tserkva in Ukraine and Sighetu Marmache in Romania. According to the project, 1.2 kilometers of a new road, a bridge, and a roundabout, and a new border crossing with a parking lot should be built there. That is going to particularly help, I would assume, aid get across that river and into Ukraine from Romania, and hopefully will not be bombed because it might well be seen as a Romanian bridge. Now, the non-stop Georgian protest continues, says Tim White. With increasing violence from the state comes increased determination and hatred of the regime. In Zugdidi, near the coast, they kicked around an effigy of Georgian Dream founder Boris Bidzina Ivanishvili in a prison cage. Actually, there have been a number of effigies made and burned and all sorts. There's another one there. How the protests are going in Georgia today. So the good news is that the protests are still going. What we don't want is the internal security services to win. It's cold. It is miserable. It is at times violent. You need bravery. You need that courage, but also, it's going to be costing money in terms of lost income for certain people. It's going to be a cost to their health, to their prison record. Maybe a lot of people have been rounded up already, beaten over the head. It's just, hats off to these people. We don't have to do that at the moment, those of us who live in comfortable democracies, and long may that continue. Now, according to the sources at Mtavari Arki TV channel, after installing Kavalashvili as the legitimate president on December the 29th, the regime plans on imposing a state of emergency and curfew, which essentially means subjecting the population to martial law. We need to break this regime now. Absolutely 100%. Okay, so we are going to go on to a bit of US news, but I'm going to thank a few of you. I just want to get a couple of bits ready. Actually, I don't know where I can find. I need to just find a comment I was going to do. Thank you very much for the very lively live chat that's going on. I really appreciate that. I appreciate that's what I'm looking for. Now, I don't know if I can. Don't know if I have time. I've got a comment I wanted to react to, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I can bring it up. Oh, maybe I can. Here we go. I just wanted to, while we're talking about America, and that's 4 weeks ago. No, I can't do that. Basically, I know it's in a live chat, but America's First Patriot had a go at me the other day. I just wanted to react to it because he was saying that I was completely wrong and being disingenuous and propagandistic in my interpretation of Trump solving the war in 24 hours, and that's most likely a day after the election victory. And of course, that didn't happen. And he's saying, so there's lots of ways of interpreting this, but the problem is he said it in many. He said the I'm going to solve the Ukraine war in 24 hours a number of times, and he's also said it by adding on the bit that I'm even going to do it before the inauguration, before I take office, before I enter the Oval Office. In other words, he is going to solve it in 24 hours, and it's not going to be a day after the inauguration. It's going to be before, like he said it in his own words. And there's no point having that random 24 hours stuffed in the middle. Like, the most sensible thing is a day after the election victory, which is what some people have interpreted that, or just a random day. He's just going to spend one whole day, solve the war in 24 hours, just in the middle of that time between November the 5th and January the 20th, or he's going to do it one day after the election victory, but then that doesn't make any sense of him talking about even before I get to the Oval Office. So let's assume he's going to solve it in one day. Is it responsible for a world leader to promise that, or to state that as part of their agenda to their electorate? I think it's deeply irresponsible. I don't think it was remotely realistic that he said that. So don't say it. Like, because otherwise you don't know what he says that's true and what is genuine and what is realistic and what's not. Don't go saying stuff like that if you can't fulfill your promise or your statement, your claim. Otherwise, I can just get elected on saying, hey, I'm going to get you guys each $1 billion and a trip to the moon. Oh, it turns out I couldn't do that. Well, that's irresponsible because I voted for you on account that I was going to get a trip to the moon. You can't just run a camp. Well, you can, because he's done it and he won. And this is the problem, is that lying and bombastic rhetoric has been normalized to the point that at least certain people can say what the hell they like and still get voted in. And when it comes to very serious matters like solving potentially World War III, I think that's deeply irresponsible. Now, to think that my understanding of what Trump is saying is propagandistic, I think is ridiculous. So no offense, America's first patriot, but like he said that, and I'm not the one going through like cognitive dissonance there. I don't have to explain that other than he's talking crap. I'm explaining that he's talking crap, but he needs to stop talking crap. But for those, real strong Trump supporters, they have to explain away how he gets to talk crap and he's still the right person to vote for. How that he says to Kristen Welker, 13,099 murderers have been, illegal immigrant murderers have been walking around in the Biden administration. No, that's in the last 40 years. No, it's not. Okay, so you're just going to lie again and just make these assertions. It's not acceptable to do that. And we need to call that out. And it's not Trump derangement syndrome to do that. It's not acceptable just to lie all the time. I'm sorry, it's not. End of lecture. Right, now let's get on and look at some of these American bits and pieces to do with Ukraine war. Now, we're going to start with interesting data here. Now, I want to know how to explain this. This is very interesting. 44% of Ukrainians trust Trump more than elsewhere in Europe, which is more than elsewhere in Europe, a survey suggests, according to the Kyiv Independent. Some 44.6%, actually 47%, of 45%, sorry, of Ukrainians trust US President-elect Donald Trump, around 10 points less than incumbent President Joe Biden, a survey by New Europe Center published on the 10th of December. It showed. In comparison, researchers cite a separate summer poll from the Pew Research Center that showed that among the surveyed European countries, Trump enjoyed the highest trust in Hungary, of course, 37%. According to the researchers, the relatively high trust in Trump can be explained by hopes for a clearer and more decisive policy towards Ukraine from the new US administration, and possibly a desire for peace in certain parts of the population. Now, this is interesting. I hadn't read that third part there, because my explanation was going to be that it's not that they trust him in the way that we understand the word trust normally. Like, I have trust in you. I really trust you to do something. I think Trump is deeply untrustworthy. If I was to see this anomalous piece of data that I think it is, that needs explaining, I think it's the understanding of, oh, we hope he's going to do that. I'm putting a lot of hope a lot of trust in him doing that. It's not, I think he definitely will, but it's kind of like, please do this because we need you to do this. And it was going okay with Joe Biden, but not okay enough. And we need someone to change it up. And you could be the person. So it's not that I trust he's going to do that, because I think it's 50-50. And if he does do good things for Ukraine, it won't be out of the goodness of his heart and his political evaluation from a geopolitical standpoint. It'd be from his own personal narcissistic self-aggrandizing standpoint. But I think he could end up helping Ukraine. I think there's a decent chance that might happen. I'm up and down on Trump completely as to what he's going to do, partly because he's a little bit up and down himself. especially if you look at what he's saying now compared to what he has previously said, and actually the lack of what he's saying now to some large degree. So I would be inclined to think that that relatively high trust in Trump is understanding the word trust in a slightly different matter in exactly what's said here. So according to the researchers, I think of that would be my intuitive reaction, which is a clearer and more decisive policy towards Ukraine from the new US administration, and possibly a desire for peace in certain parts of the population. So it comes from a hope, a desire, rather than he is a really trustworthy man and we really trust him. So this is where it gets, this is where I'm liable to rant, but I won't. Viktor Orban has met with US President-elect Donald Trump at his Mar-a-Lago residence. Again, Logan Act. The meeting was also attended by billionaire Elon Musk. Why? What are you doing, Musk? A, you're anti-Ukraine. B, you're just a plum doofus. And C, you're just a very, very rich and powerful man, and that's why you're there. You have paid your way into the White House. $277 million got you to there. And so we hear this week, Elon Musk is revealed as the sole funder, the only person that funded a Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is a liberal former justice judge who died recently and was replaced. And this super PAC that was started in her name, he was the sole funder of that. And her family's incensed because the PAC claimed that she was aligned, or, you know, yeah, Trump and Ginsburg were aligned. And it was Elon Musk doing that. So again, just as well as paying for adverts that played off Israel against Palestine from both sides, he's paid his way to the White House, and I think it's freaking disgusting. And now he's meeting with Viktor Orban and Donald Trump. So if you're thinking, yeah, Trump's got a really good chance of doing what's right for Putin, for what's right for Ukraine, when you're looking at kind of these trust surveys, and you're thinking, well, he could make the right decision. He's just met with Zelensky and Macron in Paris at Notre Dame, and no, he goes straight back to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Viktor Orban and with Elon Musk. Orban did not disclose the topic of discussion. Well, I wonder what it bloody was, but said that, quote, the future has already begun. Now, if that's not ominous, I don't know what it is. Now, Hungary's Prime Minister Orban meets with Trump. Musk says the future has begun. Lots of people reporting about this. Trump says he's formulating a concept to end Russia's war in Ukraine, just like he's has a concept of a plan for repealing Obamacare and replacing it with, I don't know, some bits of fluff glued to a lollipop stick. That's, yeah, concepts of a plan has just about as much functional value as that. To end Russia's war in Ukraine, calling the conflict ridiculous. I hate that, because he's actually aiming that at the US and NATO more than at Russia. He shouldn't say it's ridiculous. He should say it's absolutely morally repugnant, and it's a fault of a brutal, murderous dictator. But he doesn't say that because he likes Putin and he likes strongmen. And this is where I get to worry about Ukraine, because in all the times where people say, just you wait, you don't realize he's going to do a 180. To do a 180 means that he was espousing doing the opposite originally, which is morally repugnant. Then he gets in, voted on that, and does a 180. So he's lied to his electorate, gets in, then does a 180, and we should what? Congratulating him for doing a 180? No. And anyway, looking at who he's hanging out with at the moment and what he's saying and how he's saying it, he doesn't seem to be prepared to do that. And again, if he does do it, that will be under duress, I think. Trump also noted that Zelensky believes, quote, it's time to make peace, and called on Putin to reconsider his position, citing reports of 700,000 Russian military casualties in the war he's lost. Interesting. So I am worried. I'm up and down with regard to Trump and what he's going to do. Now, as Tim White said, the Budapest barrel rolled into Mar-a-Lago. Now, and I love this, Orban met the president-elect. Musk also let him shake hands with Trump. And so that is Musk being the president-elect. taking his kid in there, meeting with Orban. It's just, I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Now, here's a little thing. I wanted to play this to you. I was going to doing if I did a separate video for geopolitics today, but it probably would have gone on too long. But Ukraine the Latest podcast, which is a Daily Telegraph podcast, a right-leaning newspaper outlet who produce a very good Ukraine the Latest podcast every weekday. They had a section on yesterday where they interviewed an author who's written a book on actually why it is that, and sorry for some of you guys out there who sit on the political right, but this was a fascinating interview. And the book is about why the right like Putin so much and the connection to that kind of authoritarian isolationism that is actually much more traditional than you think. And he's mapped it back from the first, in fact, prior to the First World War, but onwards, and that kind of isolationism that was in America at the time, and then some of the rhetoric that he said, the exact rhetoric, almost word for word, that you were hearing supporting Hitler at the time, that you were hearing in America, is what you're hearing from the MAGA right supporting Putin at the moment. And the interview, I will play some of it to you, I think, over the course of this week. It is absolutely fascinating. In fact, if we were to go to YouTube, we can find it, and I'll link it to you in the live chat. Ukraine, the latest, and we'll pop into the Daily Telegraph, and this should be uploaded from today. This one, so it's actually from yesterday. I'm sure that'll be yesterday's one there. So that is one. Once again, look, who Nathaniel Raymond. No, I don't know if that is the one actually. Anyway, you can go and find it out. It's on the Daily Telegraph channel on YouTube. Just see if we got that one. There you go. It might be this one actually. Just to let you know who the person is, because you can maybe go and get the book. Yes, this is the one. Jacob Heilbrunn, editor of the National Interest, which is a foreign policy paper, foreign policy kind of magazine, I think. So Jacob Heilbrunn, his book, that interview was really, really interesting. And it's uncomfortable reading if you sit naturally on the right, because he's saying, look, there is this tradition where there is a lot of liking for people like Putin and for isolationism. And you've got this weird situation where the liberals apparently appear to be a bit more hawkish. And he's actually saying that because there's this globalist aspect to liberals, he was actually saying that it could be, I think he was saying in the interview, that Ronald Reagan was himself a little bit of against the grain in terms of some understanding of how conservatives deal with international conflict and so on and so forth. So fascinating stuff there. But yeah, I'll play some more of that later. Right. Zelensky tells Trump Putin fears only him and perhaps China. I have a feeling this could be a bit of statecraft here, a bit of cleverness from Zelensky, which is telling Trump that Putin fears you. This is exactly how you want to get Trump to side with Ukraine, which is saying you're the power broker here, mate. You're the one that he fears. You are the strong man of the world. Only you can solve this problem. That's exactly what I would do if I was Zelensky. Exactly. President Zelensky told Donald Trump that Russian leader Putin fears the US president-elect, Zelensky revealed yesterday. And just say, look, somehow say or put out there in the information spaces that, people of the world think that you are Putin's lackey. We know you're not his lackey, but people think you are. You want to make Trump get angry that he's seen as subservient to Putin. That's the way to do it. Now, Tulsi Gabbard, who's been put forward for the DNI, so the Director of the National Intelligence for the US administration, she's defended Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad before. and she was pressed on this in an interview. She finally broke her silence on the issue, but only said she, quotes, stands in full support and wholeheartedly agrees with Trump's statements about Syria, without mentioning Assad once. And it's really disappointing. So Joni Ernst, who's a female military member of Congress, who is a senator, and you think might be really strong, and that she's been touted as a potential, maybe even for Secretary of Defense if Pete Hegseth falls through. She's come out and stood and tweeted how she, has respect for Tulsi Gabbard. You're like, really? Tulsi Gabbard's like the worst option for DNI. It's just insane. Anyway, that is still rumbling on. Now, to go back to Elon Musk, this is depressing, right? Because this is using a real wingnut. So if you don't know, Mario Norfal is a right-wing kind of MAGA, but bad right-wing MAGA nut job on Twitter, who spouts every conceivable, I'm fairly sure they must be Russian, to be honest, every conceivable pro-Russian, anti-democrat, anti-left, anti-woke, all that kind of stuff, all rolled into one troll, effectively. But Elon Musk loves him and retweets him all the time. Now, this is a problem because, and I saw this yesterday and it made me angry. So Mario Norfal said, Zelensky, quote, I will ask Biden to invite me to NATO. There's no point in talking to Trump. And he was saying this to try and denigrate Zelensky and to drive a wedge between Zelensky and Trump. But then you have Elon Musk retweeting that with an emoji, because that's what responsible unelect presidents do. Retweets that, believes it, doesn't fact check it. So Zelensky said, I will speak to Biden because he's the current president. There's no point talking to Trump about this because he's not president yet. You need the whole sentence to do justice to what Zelensky was saying. But far right talking head Mario Norfal cuts the last part out to spin it, and Elon Musk boosts it to incite hate. This is why I dislike Elon Musk. He's deeply irresponsible. Mario Norfal is irresponsible. Yes, whatever. I mean, these luckily there were readers, community notes added to this, but that's always too late. He's just buying himself into the White House and then causing havoc. And here he's now meeting with Giorgia Meloni. What are you doing going around the world meeting these heads of state? It's just, this is the power. It's like a Bond villain. It's just, I never knew. I always thought that those things were so unrealistic that you can never have a single human being that could be this powerful and get into this many places. You watch these films, you think, oh, that's never going to happen. And you're like, oh, no, it is happening. As this person says, you'll need to realize the fact that a random, unelected private citizen is able to book one-on-one meetings with world leaders is a serious condemnation of the amount of political power we've allowed a small group of oligarchs to accumulate in our society. This is the sort of crap that's been going on in Russia since 1991, and we've been excoriating them for that. Now, when it's, Republicans will say, now it's one of our guys that don't mind. Oh, it's Elon Musk, it's fine. He's all right, he's one of ours. As he goes around the world buying himself more and more power. It sickens me. And we hear as well, in terms of dodginess about the election, Trump has paid off an RFK Jr. associated law firm right after RFK dropped out of the race. In other words, if we're joining the dots here, Trump paid RFK Jr. to drop out the race, then took him on his team and took his voters over. Nothing to see here. Trump campaign paid a law firm of employing RFK Jr. weeks after he endorsed Trump. There you go. Right. And then we continue to have Trump joking about annexing Canada here. Donald Trump said, it was a pleasure to have dinner the other night with Governor Justin Trudeau, the great state of Canada, taking the mickey out of it being the 51st state. I just think you can say it as a joke down a pub with your mates or whatever in a joking way, but you are now the president-elect of the United States, and you need to treat your neighbors with a little bit more respect than that. I think it's pretty disgusting. Anyway, I don't know how these things are going over in Canada. Let me know in the live chat if Canada has taken that as a jovial jest, or whether they're like, this guy's a dimwit. I'm trying to be polite. It's all very prickly at the moment in Canada, because you got Peter Poilievre, is that how it's spelled? And, you know, kind of Harper-esque person over there, very, very divided in Canada, just as it is in the US. And I assume that the Liberals will get beaten in the next election, but it doesn't look good there for, you know, it's exactly the same kind of stuff that we see elsewhere, which is more, again, it goes back to the Daily Telegraph interview, the Ukraine latest interview, which is, why does the right appear to have, in so many of these places around the world, more affinity with Putin than with Ukraine? So it's like eschewing the old kind of liberalism, small L liberalism, and you know, the small government liberalism and freedom and democracy and liberty that many old school conservatives are attracted to. And it's the authoritarian, you know, we don't want any liberals, any sexual deviants, any diversity, stuff like that. And you're like, that's the kind of Putin conservatism that appeals to people in the AfD in Germany. And actually, this is what Hallbrunn said in the interview yesterday. You know, you got Germany, and you've got other places in Europe, and we talked about France a lot, aspects of the Italian right as well. And then you've got the US, and you've got the Canadian right as well. And it's worrying. But there's this fascinating difference between those right-wing governments and then going to other places. So that's the same with Hungary to a degree, and Serbia, where you've got this ultra nationalism that has really been very pro-Russia. And then you go to places like Poland, Finland, Norway, and Sweden. And the right wing there, and Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the right wing there are quite different. And they are very much anti-Russia. And that's because, lo and behold, they fricking experienced Russia firsthand. Now, interestingly, Hungary has as well. But there's some kind of historical anomaly there where it's just a bit different to how Poland have experienced Russia. And maybe how Czechia has to some degree. So it appears that those on the right who have experienced, yeah, it is regional nationalism. Yeah. So Michael Vuchar giving a bit of a qualification there. Yeah, those who've experienced the right in Russia are, sorry, in Europe have a very different view to. But then you can argue that the AfD in Germany are much more. Sorry, I'm just stream of consciousness spitballing here. They've got an experience of Russia in East Germany or Eastern Germany. But maybe you know, you look back with rose-tinted glasses to a degree, and yeah, what explains then the difference of opinion of the AfD German right to the Polish right to. But then even if you go to Poland and you go even further to the right in Poland, so you have the PIS, which is the Law and Justice Party in Poland, who are your more populist right, bog standard populist right. But if you go further to the right than them, you've got, it's called the Confederacy, I think it is the party, and they are pro Putin. So actually, you know, when you get to those extremes in the right, then you know, Germany and Poland as well, and that's probably the case maybe in some of those Baltic states, I don't know, and Nordic states, maybe they've got an extreme right that is more likely to go with Russia. So I suppose the question then is, it's all about how big that extreme right is. Anyway, I'm liable to just start waffling now. So let's just get to some more thank yous. And my goodness, many of you have been so kind. Kevin Force, thank you for your kindness there. Really appreciate your continued support. You're a legend. Goose Springsteen, thanks, my man. JP, I don't want to sound like I'm giving you homework, but please look up the book Kaput, The End of German Miracle, book by Wolfgang Munchau, to better understand why Germany is at a crisis point politically. Well, I think, yeah, I'm no expert on German politics or German history even, but I imagine there's going to be an awful lot to do with East Germany and West Germany. There's going to be a lot to do with the influence of, and I guess a confluence of history through Berlin and through Germany and the Soviet era and then Western influence. But then you've got an awful lot of immigration issues due to Merkel's positioning on certain things, and then them being at the center of Europe, as in the EU. But then also you'll have a brewing Euroscepticism with that. There is a lot of similarity across the whole of Europe, to be honest. I mean, we can draw a lot of similarities between Rassemblement National, AFD, Reform UK, even La Liga in Italy, possibly, and so on and so forth. But yeah, thank you for hinting at a book for me to read there. I wish I had time to read more. Goodness me. Mitch, thanks, matey. Your thoughts? I'm thinking all levels of Russian society are seeing with losing Syria just how completely they are done for. I don't know. There was a lot of dooming, which is great to see from Russian mill bloggers and people generally about Syria. Syria was a real kick to the shins, and they did lose. I mean, BBC Russia and Mediazona have done these analyses of how many people have died in, how many Russians have died in the Ukraine war outside of DPR, LPR, and whatnot. They've also done a similar, I think, similar sorts of. I think it's the BBC have done this, saying that sort of 500 people have died in Syria, 500 Russians have died in Syria. And of course, if you are the family members of those who have died in Syria and then they're just pulled out of Syria, having achieved not really that much, what they have achieved is probably, you know, good for Putin since the time they've been there. So since 2015, they haven't had the pipeline completed. They have had access to Tartus port, and they have had access to cargo planes landing, access to air bases to use as a route, Syria as a route on the way to Africa, right? But all of those things aren't the sorts of things that Russian everyday, you know, you Ivan in St. Petersburg go, well, I'm really happy that we're spending all our tax dollars and people are dying in Syria because, you know, we've got access to, you know, it's not something that is part of that everyday calculation for the electorate. So I think they would have had benefit from being in Syria, and they're no longer going to get that benefit. But I don't know that that benefit will be in the public consciousness in Russia unless you really know your geopolitics, I would have thought. And as a result, you know, they've been dooming about it, and rightly so. And then I just hope that they can join the dots with, you know, Syria to Ukraine as well. That would be good, wouldn't it? Right. Moving on. So thank you so much for these questions, by the way. JP, also, this is Goose Springsteen, so thank you again, my man. Have you ever listened to Mark Galeotti's In Moscow Shadows podcast? No, but I've listened to a lot of Mark Galeotti in different places, and I really like him, and I would like to actually get him on and speak to him too. I'd like to interview everyone, but you know, just getting the time to organize these things is difficult. His recent episode on Syria was excellent. I'm just telling Benny, I forgot to tell Benny Pie I'm live. So yeah, I'll have to give that a listen, although put it on the list, right? Javier, thank you very much, Goose. Javier Elrez, how serious is the idea of UK joining back the EU? So, great question. Very unlikely because Keir Starmer promised that we wouldn't. But I think what he's doing instead is doing everything to get closer to Europe without actually joining, which I think is sensible. And even if you're Eurosceptic, you'd be hard pressed unless you just really want the UK to do itself in. You're going to have. He said, "I'll be right there. I'll let Discord know. I've almost finished, mate." we are getting closer and closer to Europe in ways that help us out with national security. And although he said we won't, there are lots of people saying that we need to join the customs union or do something similar to that. So at the moment, the UK economy is in trouble, and the whole Labour government's plan depends on economic growth. But economic growth is going to be really difficult outside of the EU, having to make our own trade deals that at the moment we've made shite trade deals with the people that we have done. And we're supposed to be a powerful nation, right? The sixth biggest economy in the world now. I think we've dropped behind France because of Brexit. Now, I know some of you will be spitting at the screen because you hate the EU and you're big Brexiteers, and fair enough. But just look at the statistics. The OBR just recently came out and said 15% of our 15% hit on the economy, and or how have they framed it? We are paying the price for Brexit, economically speaking, and that is a real problem. So there definitely has to be something done by the Labour government to promote our economy, to promote our relationship with Europe, economically speaking. Now, Keir Starmer's just been over in Saudi Arabia. Lots of things have been announced there. Problem is, you're starting to do big trade deals with a nation that's got dubious track record for human rights, and it's a lot less savory to do these big deals with Saudi Arabia than with the EU. And the EU is our biggest trade partner. It's right next door, and we need to understand that we need to work with the EU. But as for joining it, I mean, interestingly, from a polling point of view, it is now very much in favor of us rejoining. So that's helped demographically, because younger people are generally more up for being part of Europe than older people. And so as the older generations literally die off, so as 2016 was 8 years ago, and a lot of people have basically died since then. You've got younger people growing up through and becoming voters at voting age. There has been a significant shift to pro-EU sentiments, and it's weird to say that you can't ever vote on that again. But hang on, we can vote our government in every 4 or 5 years, but we can't vote on whether we want to be part of the EU or not. It's as if that can only be a once in a generation thing. Now, I know this is highly controversial for a lot of people, but yeah, I don't see it's going to happen soon. But I would imagine that if the EU can hold on with the assault that's going to be coming from Trump, but the assault that is taking place from Russia, and then from within, from Hungary, and then from the Eurosceptics within the EU, and you can add Slovakia to that, and then Serbia outside but having a pop. It has some real difficult times ahead. But if it can survive that, then I foresee us rejoining it at least in some way going forward, because I just don't think it's viable for us to be on the outside looking in. Economically, we would just be in a lot of trouble. Now, Vadim Orlov, thank you for being a member. Really appreciate that. And thank you so much for your gifting of 10 ATB Geopolitics memberships. It's incredibly generous of you, mate. Para Andy, thanks for all your hard work. Thanks, matey. Really appreciate you having you being on board, my friend. And Julian Rossiter, thank you so much for your support. If Russia had billions of dollars of frozen Russian assets, they would already have spent it. The West needs to get out their blankety blank checkbook and pen and splash the cash. Yes, we do. Do you mean in the $300 billion, give the assets directly to Ukraine? I can see validity in keeping hold of the Russian assets to just cream off the top, but I can also just see a validity in giving the whole lot to Ukraine and saying, go for it, mate. There's 300 billion. And then we have to pay less. US would be happier with that. And you can get on and spend that on spanking the crap out of Russia. But yeah, I mean, it's super important that we help Ukraine as much as possible, but trying to do that, knowing it's the right thing to do, but knowing that if you do that too much, you are going to be voted out, because people are going to be complaining, and Russia will be disinforming the general public in the information spaces. People will be complaining that you are not doing enough for your own domestic population and politics, and it's a really difficult path to navigate, that one. because there is the right thing to do and there is a thing to do to get re-elected. And unfortunately, they ain't always the same thing. And that's realpolitik, and that depresses me. KWGM, John, your truth-telling is well worth my $5. Thanks, mate. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I do try and tell the truth, but, you know, as I said, I have my biases, and I might not always get it right. But hopefully I'll try and admit it when I do get it wrong. Paul, thank you for gifting those ATP Geopolitics memberships. You are an absolute diamond, mate. Thank you. Javier Alvarez, again, member for 18 months. Americans elected Trump and they will need to deal with it. Yep. EU need to heavily invest in defense and be prepared for the US not being an active NATO member. I think they are, and I think there are calls for increase. So the 7-year budget of 7-year budget of like huge amounts of money, they are looking at pushing up the defense spending from 10 billion to 100 billion. So a 10-fold increase within the EU, what was touted over the last few days. So they are definitely doing that. And I think they realize they have to. Goose Springsteen, given how close the US election ended up being, have you changed your initial opinion that no Democratic candidate could ever have won? So my opinion, very quickly, is that with 107 days to go and without having control of the information spaces, and now that we understand that, because we were thinking the Democrats outspent the Republicans hugely, now we're finding out how much money the tech bros spent. It wasn't quite what we thought, and there was an awful lot of money that was spent. You've got to spend it in the information spaces, and you've got to combat that. And I think with 107 days to go, I still think it would have been impossible no matter who you chose. I also think that damage was done with disinformation as well and misinformation. The idea that inflation, people didn't understand inflation and how the Democrats had actually done a good job in curtailing inflation compared to the rest of the world. And this was a global problem, not an American problem alone. There was not a narrative that was sold to the American public well enough by the Democrats. And I think that was huge because, as Trump said in the interview the other night, it was that was one of the main components of how he got elected, inflation. And actually, he's got elected on Democrats not being good on inflation, and 2 in policies, 13 million immigrants being deported, and tariffs, both of which are hugely inflationary, likely to be. And he's got voted in on that. Just, and so I think there's just a huge amount of ignorance in many electorates, but in the American election, I just don't think people had a sound grip on reality, really. And that's a lot to do with information, a lot to do with low information voters getting their information from information bubbles that they exist in, and not having the wherewithal or the desire to fact check and to get educated on what they need to know to make the correct decision for their own benefit. Richard Bennett, 580p Geopolitics membership, again, just stalwart supporter of the channel. Michael, again, Michael Vucha, this is where you're wrong, JP. Happy to be. Well, not happy to be, but, you know, happy to be told when I'm wrong, when I am wrong. He will invade Canada. Your man there, Mike Waltz, is a big advocate of this. I was thinking about this, Michael, today. But the rhetoric about Canada, I was genuinely, I think I was in bed this morning doing my research and thinking, could there ever be a situation like, what if the US actually did invade Canada, and could he get enough support? I mean, and it's bonkers, isn't it? But if you keep like joking about how it's a 51st state, like, where is that going? Like, what's the point here? What he seems to be hell bent on putting tariffs on about denigrating Canada. I don't know. It would never happen. But then could it? You know, what would it take for that to happen? Welcome on board, Chris Ahern. Appreciate you being here. Right, Goose Springsteen again, dude. Thank you. JP, a hypothetical, but if Trump offered a genuinely good trade deal to the UK to keep the UK separate from the EU, should Starmer take it? Oh, moral dilemma. Objectively, the US is a much more dynamic economy than the EU, especially since 2008. Okay. My initial reaction would be no, but probably not for the reasons you're saying. This is a classic moral consequentialism discussion, which is like, do you pull the lever to save 5 people but kill 1? What the outcome being what morally defines your action here. So this is moral consequentialism, and you're just saying, well, okay, this is what you want to happen, but this is potentially even better. Would you take this better outcome, even though it screws you over here? Okay, it depends what the success is and what the outcome is that we're looking at. And actually, there's too much vagueness here to know what would be the better decision. But assuming that the trade deal with the US is better than the trade deal with the EU, would you take that trade deal to stay out of the EU? I would just be really wary about these things, because I've explained this before and I'll explain it one more time. One of the likelihoods of a trade deal with the US, along with the US having much worse regulations for the environment and for food safety and whatnot, chlorinated chicken, all that kind of stuff. The EU have much better regulations for all the stuff that we're used to consuming. We have really good regulations in the UK because we had them from the EU, right? And so our food health and our health and safety and all that kind of stuff is in a better place. And if we did a trade deal with the US, we would have to take on their worst regulation. And that means accepting things like chlorinated chicken. Remember, this was debated in the UK a couple of years ago. And that will be worse for the UK. So you might make more money out of a trade deal, or whatever your metrics of success are or outcome are. There are things that we would have to suffer. But the big one is almost certainly going to be NICE, which is our quango that sorts out drug pricing in the UK for the NHS. And it's well known that one of the things on the chopping block in the trade deal with the US would be NICE. And that's because NICE benchmarks 25% of the world's drug prices, which means that the big pharma in US are lobbying the US government to do a trade deal with the UK that gets us to tear up NICE. What that then means is the drugs to our NHS would go up phenomenally. So the reason we can get inhalers for just a few quid in the UK, and in America it was like $300, is because they don't have the regulators bargaining prices for because they don't have a centralized healthcare system. So the big pharma, the corporations get to dictate the price through the free market, and through cartels and whatever, the price just goes up hugely over there. And we have NICE to keep the prices down, and 25% of the world use NICE as a benchmark. So then they go to the drug companies and say, the UK NHS buys this drug at this price, therefore we're going to buy this drug at this price. So big pharma want to get rid of that. That will go in a trade deal, and as a result, our drug prices will go through the roof. The cost of the NHS will go through the roof, and 25% of the world's drug prices will go through the roof, and all because we'd have to tear up NICE doing a free trade deal with the US. Be very wary of any trade deal with the US. They are in the bully position. This is why coming out the EU was insane, like economically. Forget all the other things to do with immigration and sovereignty and whatever. Just from a purely economic point of view, you opt out of one of the world's biggest trade blocks, or the world's biggest trade bloc, who have incredible bargaining power, but also have moral regulatory positions as well. And opting out of them and then saying, right, we now have to do all of those hundreds of trade deals with all of these individual countries on our own now, from a position of relative a lack of power. So we are now, instead of being the EU and doing a trade deal with the US, we are now the UK doing a trade deal with the US, and the US get to bully us. We did a trade deal with Australia and New Zealand, and they bullied us. Even the people who did the deal in the Conservative government have come out recently and said it was a terrible trade deal. And Japan, the Japanese trade deal, terrible. So if we've come out of the EU and demonstrably done poor trade deals with people around the world, that we were promised we'd be able to go out around the world and do these great trade deals in the UK because we're so great, and we failed. Like, doing a trade deal with the US is only going to benefit the US. The US will do us over, because that's what you do when you're a minnow against a big person. Like, you have no leverage. So we may do a trade deal, and it may want to keep us out of the EU, but I just would imagine that trade deal would not be that good for us in the balance of things. Right, I need to finish up here. Thank you so much to everyone. What, in your learned opinion, is an actual proper outcome based on the reality for the war to end? Thank you for living the life 941. At the moment, I think it is likely to end in a forced negotiation, frozen lines. I think it'll be suboptimal for Ukraine. I think they'll be forced to do it by the US, but I hope that the rest of the world can get it to a point where they will help with, if they can't be in NATO, it'll be something equivalent to NATO, and then they'll try and get those lands back diplomatically. But it depends. It could be that actually Ukraine try and hold on for as long as possible and use the new kind of weaponry that's coming online in the next 6 months to try and exact a cost on the Russians that is too much for the Russians. I'm 50-50. So there's either that or the Russian economy falls apart. And then my big hope is the Russian economy falls apart and the Ukrainians can use loads of those weapons to start hitting the Russian refineries again and in the deep rear and all sorts, and Russia capitulates, and that is Ukraine's way of getting back its territory. I think that could happen, but also you could have the US forcing Ukraine to an unfortunate negotiation that will not benefit Ukraine. The big problem here for Ukraine are just numbers of soldiers, boots on the ground. If they had many more boots on the ground, they would be looking to win this more militarily going forward with all the weapons and the support from the EU and UK going forward and other countries. I'm a bit all over the place because it could go any of those directions. I haven't really. I need to more formally put that together in a video. JP, you're playing. Are you planning on doing another local ticketed event? The last one I couldn't attend because of my holiday clashing. Would love to see you live, wee bit furry. Thanks for your support there. Yes, I would. I don't have a problem with that at all. If someone wants to organise that, by all accounts, go for it. It was a real pleasure and privilege to do it previously. I almost had too much to say, and I had to shut myself up. Mitch Ledge, thanks for your hard work, JP. In via ad. Oh my goodness! Don't make me do Roman numerals. Something ending in a 9 though. 89. What is it? 1000. Oh, yeah, excellent. Thanks, mate. Really appreciate that, Mitch. Good man. The Weasel super sticker. Thanks, and I saw you on Blue Sky today. And AJ Simo. So thanks, Weasel, for keeping on. Thank you, AJ Simo. Goodness me, that you guys are way too generous. Thank you. Please remember to be generous to those in Ukraine who desperately need all our help. I'm planning on doing a fundraiser with a whole bunch of other people. I said this the other day. It's still being sort of worked out at the moment. Road to of course the L was yes, 50,000 50L, isn't it? 50,139. Of course it is. Oh, I just got too confused. You panicked me. If I could sit down and just calmly do that, Mitch. Yes. Please subscribe. 50,139 by January the 2nd. Of course it's going to happen. Yes, some of those questions I really need to answer much more fully, and I was rushing it, particularly the one of how I see it's going to end, because I'm not sure is how I see it's going to end, but it's basically one of about 3 options. But I'm most hopeful, like the most positive thing for Ukraine would be the collapse of the Russian economy, and I'm most worried that Trump will lift up sanctions on Russia, and that will be the single worst thing he can do. So I'm less worried that he won't provide military aid to Ukraine as I am he will lift sanctions. So I think if the US doesn't provide military aid, there's still a path for Ukraine through funding through the EU and whatnot, and producing their own, but they still need funding for that. But you know, if you've got frozen Russian assets and so on and so forth, I think it's absolutely vital that Russia falls apart economically for good to come about. And Barabas Dantiok says, I heard Israel bombed Tartus and Latakia. I don't know if it was Tartus. I think it was just north of Tartus. But some people are saying Tartus. I don't think it was, but not the Russians. Yeah, they blew up a bunch of missile sort of patrol vessels, 5 of them. Bibi has disappointed me. I was hoping Bibi would pull the big funny. He has, apparently there were tanks on the way to Damascus, but they have also hit air bases, taken out MiG-29s and Sukhoi jets as well. So yeah, I don't know how much benefit to Ukraine there will be from what's going on in Syria, because there will be at least some Russian troops and equipment coming back from Syria that will be redeployed to Ukraine. So that's your negative there. And finally, guys, thank you to Rob Gannon. Rob Gannon. Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate your support, and all of you guys. Ida from Norway, thank you so much for your support again. Really means a lot. All of you guys are total legends. And it's worth noting that Joe Blogg's channel, he's been hacked again and he's lost his channel. I was speaking to Benny Pie today about how I'm worried about my own security. He was saying that the ATP Geo, my website, atpgeo.com, it was being absolutely flooded by bots today. But that might be fairly normal activity. But he was like, there is a noted set of attacks on the website. So, you know, hopefully I've got enough security, fingers crossed, because it is really worrying. Anyway, take care, y'all. Thank you so much for your support. Please remember those in Ukraine. I will be doing some fundraising going forward. Join us on Blue Sky and check out that video, Wayne. The same, if you haven't, and others, on how the war affected you. I really want your accounts of how the war has changed you, or how it's affected you, so I can do a video to look at those and go through some of your comments and share them with the wider audience. It'd be absolutely fabulous. Take care, y'all. I need to go and eat. I'm going to be in very bad books with my partner for not being there. Y'all take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips.